There is power, power, help me sing. Wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Let's talk about that power. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out the grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name. There's power in your name. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name. There's power in your name. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. All right, break it down, break it down. Woo! I love this song, but I feel like we sing it too pretty. That little stand in your love. Well, real quick, hit me one time. Hey, there you go. So we're gonna sing it with a little bit of swag. You gotta sing it with a little sass. I like to call it minor singing. Would you sing it for us, Aaron? Help us out.
My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand
Let's all sing it
in your
together.
love. Yeah.
My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Come on, Travis, take a little solo. All right, try this with me. Sing my fear, can't stand a chance when I stand in your love, your love, your love. My fear can't stand a chance when I stand in your love, your love, your love. Say your love, your love, your my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love.
This is a 98-year-old movie house. It was built in 1924. It's been remodeled and renamed many times over the almost century that it's been here, since the Depression era. And I saw my first movie here in 1984 at Fievel, American Tail. We're talking about loving where you live, and for me it's also the history, loving the things that are here that need tending, that need stewardship. So I reached a place last year with my wife Sarah and my parents where we've been talking about it for months, what do we do about the theater? What can we do? Can we do anything? Can we afford it? Is there a way to bring it back to life? So we decided that, yeah, we're gonna swing for the fences and do a complete reimagining. What can we do to bring it forward for the next 100 years for the community that is yet to be, for us and for our kids and for everyone around us, but for the ensuing decades as well. So love where you live. Well, I grew up around here. I mean, I grew up here. What's interesting is when I graduated high school, I didn't want to live here anymore, and I didn't love where I live, and I spent a chunk of my adult life living in Seattle and up and down the West Coast and just traveling around. But I definitely felt that I reached a point where that journey was over and God was calling me back to Port Orchard. It's easy to see how people don't come together if you're not looking. Really, if you just peel back the curtain a little bit, you see groups of people, whether it's church people or civic organizations or arts organizations, that people just that believe in something and want to do something together and make life better for their community. It's happening all around us. So I think, loving where you live is, really seeing people, not looking past people. I do see people all the time that are waiting to turn that I know from church or from life or from the restaurant or from the theater. And so just that feeling of like, hey, I know you. It's like your soul knows the difference between walking down Bay Street, seeing people you know and love, walking into your favorite restaurant, seeing people you know and love, and just liking or commenting or friending someone or something like that. So it does ask more of you. It asks more of you to love where you live, but it gives more back. I think it just fills you up. It's like love who you live with too, and love where you live, love the mountains, love the people, love the traffic, on Sedgwick. But the biggest revelation of this project is that it's not about me. It's not about what I want or what I want for the theater. It's about this community. We're taking the time to tear it all down so we can build it back up. To be what it needs to be for the coming decades of a place to gather, a place to enjoy art, a place to hear music, a place to, watch films and be here with your family and just be a community and enjoy something nice. It's gonna be nice. I really look forward to kind of rolling out the red carpet, welcoming the community into this space.
Hey, welcome to New Life Online, people becoming the church. So glad, however you tune in, I'm just so glad you're here. And one of the things that we just believe as New Life is that it's people coming to church. So this isn't like a broadcast. This isn't like, just like I'm getting entertained. No, this is actually church. And we're seeing this, that through the online community, needs are being met, community is happening, and relationships are forming, and that's what we believe in. But we do live in a place, we live somewhere, like we live here and we're actually filming somewhere. And so I do want you to hear this because I think it matters. And you're like, well, I live in Virginia, or I live in, I'm not even in your country. Well, we have camps all summer. And the reason I say that is because a lot of you are local. You're like, I live here. The other is some of you, you're like, I would give to that because I believe in it. Or you're like, you know what, I want to have one of those camps where I live, like I'm dreaming about it. So I do think it matters. And newlife.tv/camps, you'll see there's 3 different camps this summer. There's a middle school camp, a kids camp, and a high school camp. And each of those matter strategically for a reason, don't they? I mean, like middle schooler is not a high schooler. They're different. It's a different space in their development. And we just believe this, they unify our church all summer. And so this isn't, you're like, it's just for the kids. It's not. It's actually like when I serve at kids camp, I walk away changed just as much as kids. And so, by the way, you can serve without being there. I mean, we call that giving. And so there's scholarships that get kids there. And so the reason I want you to circle that is, one, if you're like a grandparent, a parent, would you get your kids signed up? Get them there, whatever it takes. 2, if you're like, I want to serve. By the way, you don't have to live here to serve. Like, what a cool trip. You might be like, I flew in and I was serving. So there's the high school, middle school, and kids camp. I just would ask, would you serve at one of them, at all of them? Would you be part of it? It's our whole church doing this together. It's going to take every generation. We believe that. And by the way, we're always one generation shy from the gospel not getting passed on. And then the last is this. Would you think about maybe what it would be that you would just give something to get a kid to camp? And by the way, when we say that, it's not just kids. It's like you'll get a leader to camp. You can get a lot, it's just like it takes all of us giving. And we also underwrite camps. So it's like all of our giving going towards this. So newlife.tv/camps, that's going to be really all summer long. And we believe we're going to have the best summer ever and God's going to do a great work. And so I just wanted you to have that circled on your calendar, as well as one of the things we've just been looking at and praying about is we're continuing to ask, what if we did what we're doing here live? So that would be an in-person audience Thursday nights. And so I do want to have that in the back of your head. Many of you have been reaching out saying, I'd love to be a part of that. We're building a team. It's not too late. And guess what? We're going to just try stuff. So it's like, we're going to try it. We'll see how it goes. So with that, I'm here, Ryan. We're diving in. We're Love Where You Live, and we're in chapter 6. This is week 7. And last week we looked at chapter 5, where really there was some like really interesting problems and really specific to us today. If you're like catching up, you should go back and watch that, because it's like exactly where we're at. And then next week is our last week, and we're looking at just filling the city.
Yeah.
So this week, like, what do we see? What are we looking at? And what's the problem? What's the stuff that Nehemiah's been facing? Like, what is Nehemiah? And then I want to get to a question, which is like, how has Love Where You Live been affecting you? But before that, like, give us Nehemiah.
Yeah, so I'm Ryan. So glad to be with you today, Brian. And we're looking actually at Nehemiah chapter 6. And in chapter 6, we're getting caught up in the story of Nehemiah. Maybe you've been following along. Maybe this is your first week. One of the things I love about Nehemiah is Nehemiah has this relatable story. He has a story that we can find ourselves in, because Nehemiah, it's really pretty simple. He's a guy with a job who kept a journal about what God was doing in his life and in the city around him. And so that's something that I feel like all of us could do. And so we've seen Nehemiah on this journey from going to something that he cared deeply about. Not only that, responding with prayer first, making a plan, and then getting others involved to fix the brokenness that broke his heart. And so as we look at the world around us, this is one that I feel is so easy to apply. I mean, the book of Nehemiah just provides an example. It provides even an archetype for what does it look like for us as followers of Jesus, living in communities that have brokenness. How do we not only see that, but respond to it in our everyday lives? And so we find Nehemiah in the middle of this great work where he's rallied other people, where he has left what his job was to deal with the brokenness that is on his heart. And we find him in the middle of a great work.
It feels like one, I mean, it feels really easy to see problems around us and be like, oh, there's a lot of problems. 2, I think we all want to be a part of great work. That's why Love Where You Live is like, it's kind of magic. You're like, I think a lot of people have been responding. What for you has been like, for Love Where You Live, has been like either sparking your heart or like imagination, or just what you've been seeing that's like, oh, this is great.
Yeah, Love Where You Live is something that I absolutely love following along with Nehemiah, but I love seeing how it applies in my life. That's why I've loved this book so much. Maybe you're familiar with the Bible and you read a story like Jonah and you're like, haven't been swallowed by a whale lately.
Yeah, that's not, I haven't done that one yet.
No, I don't identify. With Nehemiah,
It's practical.
I'm
That's
sitting
good.
there just going, okay, I can
good.
live this out.
Yeah.
And for the last couple weeks, the question that's been on my mind has been this question. Whenever I go somewhere, or I'm interacting with my neighbors, or I'm coaching my son's baseball team, or I'm at the store, I ask this question: what would somebody who loves where they live do? When I go to the store, when I interact with service workers, when I interact with my neighbors, with my kids' friends, what would somebody who loves where they live do? And it's changed my filter. It's not only changed my attitude, but it's actually changed some of my actions in the way that I live in the community God has placed me in. And the second thing that, Brian, I've been blown away by is people love where they live.
Yeah.
We look for what we want to see. And as people are looking for things to love, they're finding it. And it's not necessarily loving a geographical location. It's loving the people God has placed in front of you. And this last week, I had an opportunity where I live. I live in South Kitsap, and as I make my drive into Silverdale, there's been a construction project just off the freeway for about the last year. You might have driven by it and wondered, what is that?
Yeah.
It's actually called Pendleton Place. And Pendleton Place is built with a local mental health service as well as a local housing authority. And Brian, it's going to provide housing for 77 people who are homeless in our community.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where everyone sees the problem. If you were to ask, probably in many communities, people would say, we have a homelessness problem.
Yeah.
I walked in and you could sense that these were the people that were doing something about it. Why? Because they loved where they live.
Yeah.
And it's new lifers like my friend Christine, who works full time there and is providing for the first time people to have a home. It's a housing first model where they believe housing is going to lead to sobriety, is going to lead to getting lives back on track, is going to lead to these people taking their next steps. And I was able to meet a couple of people there, and you can tell their life is changing. And for the first time, they have community. They have a sense of purpose. They have a sense of belonging. Why? Because some people decided to simply do this. Love where they live.
Love where they live. Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible stuff.
What's so interesting, you know, and it's like all of us live in different cities or different places and different areas. And one of the things I love is you're in an area, it's like it's a garden city. I mean, it's like you live in a place that's like both beautiful because you've got all of the, you know, nature. It's like, but also there's like a thriving infrastructure. I mean, I think they're playing more, but it's like I walked away with somebody that's like one of your close friends in the city, and it's like he talked in such a way about Port Orchard, your home, where it was like, I think I love where you live. Like, should I move here? Like, but I think what's infectious, and this is one of the reasons I think it's important for this message, is when I'm around you, I love where you live, but I love where I live.
That's good.
And it starts to leak. Have you noticed that? It's like it leaks out, and when people love where they live, it's contagious.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things, you know, it's like you buy a car and then you see that car everywhere, but you didn't before.
Yep.
One of the things I think I'm realizing is people are telling stories, and we're getting stories online, it's like connecting all these things, is people are starting to notice the things of where they live. It's like, oh, God's here. God's right there.
Yeah.
And I think that's starting to connect, and maybe before we just weren't aware of it. And so I guess as we look at, because this chapter has some great themes. I think there's kind of some broad stroke themes. But before we jump into this, like specifics, some of the stuff we see, I guess I'm curious, because for you personally to love where you live right now, you know, you said it, Nehemiah is so practical. It's like if you're a business owner, entrepreneur, like this makes a ton of sense. If you're like, I'm in construction, well, good, like this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So, but for you, you're actually like, I'm doing a building project. So some of us, we're not connected to that. Can you connect us a little bit and maybe get us excited to celebrate like what's happening in South Kitsap?
Yeah, so in South Kitsap right now, we have an incredible opportunity that we kind of jumped on because we saw the miracle in front of us. There's another church in our community that has a paid off building right in the heart of where our community is growing. Literally across the street, I drove by it today, 200 apartments being built.
Wow.
Right across on the other side, 112 townhomes are coming in. And the cool thing is, just kitty corner from that, is where my kids go to elementary school.
Yeah.
And so right in the heart of where it's growing, we were given the opportunity to sign a 20-year lease on a facility that is 7 acres of incredible outdoor space and 30,000 square feet. And so right now we're in the middle of raising funds for that, and we're praying for that. And it's been an incredible process as we're going to remodel that facility so we can tell our community we're ready for you.
Wow.
And so a place to invite friends and neighbors, and we're hoping it becomes a beacon of hope and a beacon of belonging in my hometown, in my neighborhood where I live in South Kitsap. And so I heard a line a couple weeks ago that was straight out of Nehemiah that I'm like, that's exactly where we're at. And it was a line that said this: it's that we might think that the church was building a wall, but the wall was actually rebuilding a church. And it's just been so cool to see people come around this common dream, vision, and mission, and seeing the church rebuilt as we're going to have a facility that's going to allow us to reach our community like never before.
Wow. Okay, so I mean, I guess if I'm sitting there and I'm like, I want to be a part of that, can I still give to that? I mean,
absolutely.
That's like I would want to.
Yeah, so we're one-time gifts and 3-year commitments, and you can give online at newlife.tv/give. It's called the SK Training Center.
Cool.
And you can still go online and give. We still got some more to raise, but we believe God's got that.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so taking that heart, because you're like, I'm in it. Let's dive into chapter 6, because I think it's really appropriate. So what do we see?
Yeah, so obviously we know about this great work, the rebuilding of the walls. And like you've said, I've resonated so much with this story because right now we're going through a building project. We're going to jump in chapter 6, and we're going to see a theme that comes out here pretty quickly that we'll kind of discuss. We're going to start here. It says, Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies found out that I had finished rebuilding the wall and that no gaps remained, though we had not yet set up the doors in the gates. So the work was still undone. Sanballat and Geshem sent a message asking me to meet them at one of the villages in the plain of Ono. But I realized they were plotting to harm me. So I replied by sending this message to them. I am engaged in a great work, so I can't come.
Yeah.
Why should I stop working and meet with you.
Yeah.
So here's what we see. Oh, well, Brian, before this,
Yeah.
I've got a simple question for you.
Okay.
Brian, what do you think has a longer attention span?
Okay.
Would you say a goldfish or a human being?
I mean, it feels like a trick question, but I'll say a human being.
You would be
longer.
You would be incorrect.
Goldfish.
A goldfish. A study just recently came out, and they were comparing attention spans, and now a goldfish has a longer attention span than the average American human, and some of you just stopped scrolling on Instagram
Yeah.
to tune back into what I just said.
That's funny,
We're
yeah.
all guilty of that.
Yeah.
We all have this same opportunity that Nehemiah had to be this, distracted.
Wow.
And so this doesn't come down in the story to being defeated. It's not talking about engaging in an actual war. It's literally talking about this, being distracted. And it's something you and I honestly face in our world. And here's the reason why. Because the cards are stacked against us. In 2021, advertisers spent $296 billion for one thing, your attention.
Yeah. Wow.
Your attention.
It's
And
worth that much.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I love this quote actually that I saw, and it goes into the story of Nehemiah, and I think it'll play into the theme that we're talking about today. Nehemiah knew this, and what would it look like for me to live this out? It says, if we fill our lives with purpose, we won't be distracted looking for everyone's approval. What would that look like, a life filled with purpose that was actually undistracted?
As I was getting ready and reading this chapter, I thought about there's a medieval, it's like the etymology. There's a medieval like contraption I'll use, but basically what they do is like a torture tool, and they tie both your arms. So you see this? Tie both your arms to these different like cranks, and they'd crank it, and the whole purpose was to stretch you into two pieces. I mean, it's like horrible.
Sounds horrible.
Yeah. So they had a name for it, which is distraction. That's what they called it. Pulling you in two different directions. And I just wonder how many of us, it's like we just are like, well, two, just like that's the lowest number. Like I feel like I'm stretching all, but how many of us is does the enemy want to distract us so we can't do a great work?
Yeah, and sometimes you might get at the end of the day and feel like you've given your attention to something the whole day,
Yeah.
and yet you feel like you haven't accomplished anything.
Anything.
You're like, I've been busy,
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot,
Yeah.
but what progress or purpose do I have to actually show for that?
Yeah.
And Nehemiah provides this window into what he thought was most important, was worth being undistracted for.
Wow.
Now notice, it doesn't
Wow.
mean that you give inattention. It doesn't
No.
mean that you're undistractable.
No.
There's people in your life that are important that need our attention.
Yeah.
But in the life of Nehemiah would be an example of what does it look like to say what God has called me to do, what my hands are currently doing is so important that I'm willing to make the choice to simply do this, to live undistracted. There was a calling on his life. There was something for him to accomplish, and he knew what it would mean for others, and so he chose to live undistracted. And it's a way that I believe will lead us into a different way of living, a different style of life, if we would once again choose to live undistracted.
Wow. Okay, so maybe I'm just wondering, like practically, because that's the thing I think about when I'm thinking about distractions. I'm like, I want that life, right? I'm a dad, I have a family. I just think about, would every parent live undistracted? I'm like, well, that'd be better. Would my kids learn to grow up in an undistracted home? I'm like, well, that'd be better. Our community undistracted. So one of the things I think about is I'm like, well, what would I have to give up to be undistracted? So I guess like practically, Ryan, because I watch you, so many areas of this you live undistracted, but I really think about the way you raise your kid. You're undistracted. And I get there's all the distraction, but you're like, I am intentionally trying to be undistracted. I mean, one of the things I've done with you is like, I've seen you with your kids fishing on a river. And that's like, I think you parent that way, where you're like, what would it look like just to be undistracted? So I guess pull that back for us, if we're entrepreneurs, we're at a job, just like, what would it look like? How do we live this out? What does it look like practically?
Yeah, so I think the one thing is when you're living distracted, there's some things that you just risk that you're gonna lose. And so if you choose distraction, we understand that that would come with the sacrifice of some things that in our life are very valuable. And one of the things we see in the life of Nehemiah, in verse 8, he's going to address this. And he addresses what we lose if we're distracted.
Yeah.
And one of them is this, the truth.
Wow.
And so Nehemiah, the people who are trying to oppose him are going to say things about him that are untrue. And in verse 8, he even says, there's no truth to any part of your story. You're making up the whole thing. For him choosing to stay focused on what God had called him to, he stays in line with the truth that God has for his life and for his calling. When we choose to be distracted, we'll find ourselves just going from attention to attention to attention. And in that, we miss out the truth that God has for our life. And I find myself doing it when I play the comparison game. When I see social media or see other people's highlights reel, I start to believe things that aren't true when I begin to become distracted. And I've noticed that the more distraction, the less I feel satisfied with what the truth in my life really is.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really good. Okay, what else?
I would say another one is they did a study. This one reminds me of this study that I heard about. And they did a study on young people. And they followed them. It was for an extended matter of time. And what they were trying to find out is what makes people successful and fulfilled and others not. And so they looked at everything. They looked at where they were from geographically. They looked at their level of education. They looked at their gender. They looked at their social class. They looked at how much money their family made. And they found that there was one particular thing that all of these people had in common that led to their success and fulfillment. And it was this one word. And the word was grit. And it's not a word that we use a lot, but it leads me to what I wanted to talk about, which is this: determination. We see it in the story with Nehemiah time after time. He actually strengthens his determination in the face of distraction and opposition. Verse 9, we even see it at the very end. He said, this, so I continued the work with even greater determination. Distraction will get in the way of our determination.
Yeah.
Period. And so we see that this determination is what led to him finishing what God had placed on his heart. And if he would have been distracted, he wouldn't have been able to stay determined. And how about for you and I? Sometimes when I face opposition, I don't get more determined, I get more
discouraged. I get discouraged,
I get discouraged. And that is from distraction.
Wow.
Distraction will lead to discouragement. But if I am undistracted, it strengthens my determination. And we only see that through determination is the way that Nehemiah accomplishes, with other people's help, what God had called him to do. And I just said the third one.
Yeah.
Because it's so true here in the story. And the final thing is this: accomplishment. Do you ever feel like you have a to-do list at the beginning of the week, and then at the end of the week it's longer?
And you're like, I wish some of these boxes were checked.
Yeah. You're like, I know this week I did stuff and things.
Yeah.
I did a lot of it. I was busy.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I actually accomplished anything.
Yeah.
And I think what creeps in when we allow distraction in, we miss out on a sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
Being able to say, God, this is what you've placed in front of me for my hands to do, for my heart to be committed to, and I've actually finished it.
Wow.
There's actually some really great sense of a purpose and sense of accomplishment that comes when we complete something.
Yeah.
And I'd go as far as to say this, and it's the Jesus connection from this story. When we talk about Nehemiah finishing, I'm reminded of the words of Jesus, who even on the cross says, it is finished.
Yeah.
It was this sense of accomplishment, of finality, that only happened, that we see in the life of our Savior, that started at a young age when he said, I had to be about my Father's business, and continued through his undistracted life.
Well, and through truth and the level of determination, because that's the thing, is like, talk about determination. Yeah. And then to accomplishment. Yeah. And I think about it, it's so interesting, because I just never thought about, these are things that you basically, instead of sacrifice, you're gonna like give something up to be undistracted. When you're distracted, it rips something from your soul. I hadn't thought about that. That's so interesting. And probably, when you think about Jesus, you watch Jesus, and I don't know if you know this, right? He's like bouncing around a little bit. He's like, or another way, like he seems easy. He can be interrupted.
Yeah.
But interruption is different than distraction.
That's-
because he's still like dead focused on the mission.
Yep.
And so I probably need the margin in my own life to be interrupted because I'm not distracted. When I'm distracted, I can't be interrupted. I'm too distracted. And so I wonder, like, for how many of us the mission's getting lost because we're distracted, the problems in our community are getting bigger because we're distracted, and then at the end of the day, we're focused on the wrong stuff. And what a tragedy of our life to get to the end of our life and look back and just realize we were distracted. You have any, like, what final thoughts or anything that's just, like, on your heart, or, like, practically, like, is there an action that you're like, this is what we do?
Yeah, so I'm a so what guy.
Yeah.
So I've heard the story. I'm reading the story in Nehemiah. What do I do with it?
Yeah.
And for me, I think it's simple. This week, or this as you walk out today, as you continue on your day today, is stay focused on what God has given you to do. That's it. Stay focused on what God has given you to do.
That's good.
And we see it in the story of Nehemiah, and we can actually see it in our own life. It's to stay focused. God's placed something on your heart, in your community, where you love, where you live. Would that stay in your focus? Brian, I want you to know something about me. I am not a videographer. I'm not a photographer. It's not.
You're not behind the camera right now. Yeah.
I have an iPhone.
Yeah.
I mean, so I'm
Yeah.
basically a photographer.
Yeah.
But I don't do that.
Yeah.
But one thing that I do know about video and about taking pictures that to me applies to life is the camera can be pointed in the right location and can still be out of focus.
Yeah.
It can be in the right place, but if it lacks focus, the picture you see right now would not be clear. So we can literally be living where God has placed us, be where He wants us to be, and be out of focus and not see a picture of what He's doing right in front of us. And so from that, my prayer has been similar for my life that it is for yours. And it's this, that would my heart and my feet be in the same location.
Wow.
Where God has placed me physically, would my heart be in focus to see the picture of what God's doing right in front of me? That's my prayer for me this week, and it's my prayer for you too.
You know, you as we close, I'm going to take a second just to pray. You know, by the way, as you're looking, you're like, I don't even know where to start. Like, what would be my life's focus? One of the tools that I think could help is if you go to newlife.tv/love where you live, there is a workbook, and it's the type of thing that does a little heart investigation that I think would help you discover that. Because for some of us, we're like, I don't know. And the other thing that's okay is it's okay to finish this series and have a blank line like, God, will you show me your photo? Better ask God than me come up with it myself. And so I think that's okay to be like, God, will you start to show that to me? You told me a story, and I just, you know, I'm watching right now is there are real problems. And you talk about homeless problems, and it's like so many of us around the U.S. we're feeling the weight of these problems. You told me a story about just you and your son, and I'm just curious, like, if you'd share it, because I think one of the things it does, it just reminds us that it's not about me, it's about we.
That's a good line.
And it probably fits in, you know, it's this message, but for me, it's like all of Nehemiah and all of what we're looking at are current circumstances. So you guys were driving. You and your son. How old's your son?
Yeah, so my son is 8 years old, and we're driving just by our house. And we've lived in our house now. We're coming up on 5 years in our home. And when we first moved in there, just all around us was open land. So there had been times when Hudson and I would literally walk from our house and be able to walk for miles. And we'd be able to see creeks. You know, we'd see deer. We'd see all this fun outdoor stuff, which is what we love. And so the other day we're driving by our house, and what used to be one of the trails that we would hike on is now brand new homes. And it's going to be about 300 new homes right there. And as we're driving by, Hudson was upset.
Yeah.
He's upset. He's like, Dad, why do they have homes?
That's where we used to ride our bikes.
That's where, that's where we'd go on bike rides. That's where, remember when we saw the creek and we went down to it and we weren't supposed to tell Mom, you know, that one. So remembered all that, and he's upset about it.
Yeah.
And it was a moment for us to have that discussion, and it was as simple as this, but it stayed with me, and obviously with others, is, well, Hudson, we have a home. Don't you think other people should have that opportunity as well? Yeah. And I hope in little moments like that, it's teaching me and teaching my son that it's not just about me, it's what's best for us. Yeah. And in the story of Nehemiah, it wasn't just what's best for Nehemiah, It's what's best for those things that are broken in the world around us.
Yeah, I hope you felt this, that when I'm around Ryan, it's contagious for me to love where I live. And because he loves where he lives. And I notice with teenagers, they love their school better when they're around you. And I think that people learn from you how to love where they live. And so I think South Kitsap, where you live, is better for it. And I think we're learning in your footsteps. So I hope that encouraged you today. And by the way, one of the things I believe is when we get undistracted, we become contagious with the mission in front of us. So let me pray for you today. Jesus, we just thank you. You're doing a great work. You're doing a great work. Some of us, we've gotten discouraged. We're reminded you're doing a great work. And that may our sense of discouragement go back to a sense of undistraction, where we realize that we are just, it's like, we're fighting for eternity. We're not like just living in the here and now. And so we're reminded that you put on flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. And so we want to do that. Help us move back into our neighborhoods. Help us see our neighbors. Help us to live in our communities with our hands and our feet and be where we are. And so with that, God, will you help us rediscover the truth that you have? To, God, be undistracted in such a way that helps us be determined for your mission, and that ultimately we would see a sense of completion that you are doing a great work. So if anybody, God, is watching and they just never had a chance to say yes to you, just ask for this opportunity, that they would receive you, that they would be able to say, you know, I'm just going to give up the control that I've been taking in my life and I give it over to you, Jesus, and that you would become Lord. And so we thank you, God, for what you're doing. We are just watching the good fruit of the investment of what you're doing for the kingdom here now. Praise in your name. Amen.
Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Lord, turn his face toward you and give you peace. His favor be upon you in 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May His favor be upon you in 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children.
May His favor be upon you in 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children.